So our next session is with Carlo Dade. Carlo is the Director of International Policy at the University of Calgary's School of Public Policy. A leading voice on Western Canadian trade, he founded and led the Trade and Trade Infrastructure Policy Research Centre at the Canada West Foundation. He's a frequent media commentator, bringing timely expertise as Canada navigates unprecedented trade challenges. He serves as a professional affiliate at the Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy, which is at the University of Saskatchewan and the University of Regina. He's an honorary senior fellow at the School of International Development and Globalization at the University of Ottawa, and a member of the Mexican Council on Foreign Relations. This will be a conversation between Jeremy Welter, Vice President of APAS, and Carlo, so I invite Jeremy to the stage as well. Please give a round of applause to welcome them both.
Thank you very much. Carlo, I'd like to start off by thanking you for being willing to attend our Ag Summit. I think it's really important to get some of the valuable insights that you can provide to our attendees in the room today. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Am I on screen? I've got two different video setups here. This is, typical. For the folks who know me, this is typical Carlo.
You are. We can see you. The picture's coming in perfect.
Okay. Do you have me as Natalie or as C. Dade?
We've got you on Natalie.
Okay. Perfect. There you go. So I'm Natalie today. Good afternoon, everyone.
So I'd like to start off with, I suppose maybe not a general question, but in this climate, it's very easy to kind of get down in the mouth and focus on the negatives, and it's hard not to when you're sort of bombarded with that daily. I'd like to take a slightly different approach, and I'd like to focus on some of the positives and some of the opportunities that could potentially come out of the situation we're faced with. So in 2023, the agriculture and agri-food system in Canada contributed $150 billion to our nation's GDP. Now, the RBC report by John Stackhouse, which was an update to the 2018 Barton report, outlined opportunities that exist for Canadian ag to grow by another $44 billion in the next 10 years, by 2035. Where do you see the opportunities? What should we as individual farmers be focusing on? And what should we as lobby and policy organizations be focusing on?
Sure. Well, Jeremy, it's great to see you, man. It's been, 2 weeks, 3 weeks since Crop Week. Also, apologies for not being there in person, but it appears that my career with Canada West is beginning as it ended, or ending as it began. I was supposed to, my first meeting ever on my own in Saskatchewan, I was supposed to meet Chris Decker at the Saskatoon Inn. So I've been on the job for, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. I'm running late. The flight in is delayed. So I get off the plane. I call Chris and say, hey, sorry, plane's late. I'm going to be about 10 minutes. And he says, come on over to the inn. And I said, well, I'm out of the airport. I'm looking around. I don't see anything that looks like Saskatoon Inn off in the distance. And he says, what do you see? I see, well, a bunch of houses off in the distance. And he says, what airport are you at? So, of course, I was in YQR at the time. So I still haven't made it to the Saskatoon Inn 12 years later. So apologies for that. But yeah, to your question, there are opportunities in the growing global demand for food, for all commodities. And obviously, agriculture is most important. This is kind of pablum. We had the Barton report, the conference we did at the West Foundation up in Saskatoon on the global middle class. Jerry Ritz came in to talk about our expectations for growth in the global middle class. All of that continues apace. Demand and the estimates of demand have not shifted. The rise of the global middle class continues too. So more consumers with more money to spend on better quality food. So the basics in the Barton report, the basics in the Stackhouse report remain. So the baseline is unchanged. What's changed, obviously, is the global trade situation. And there is no way to sugarcoat what's happening in the US. This is indeed the existential threat of our generation in Canada, with the not just the closing of the US market, but the damage the Americans are deliberately and calculatedly inflicting while they're doing it, and the inadvertent damage from the incompetence of what they're doing are existential threats for us. The breakdown of global rules-based trade altogether is another issue we face beyond the US. The struggles we've had with Japan, but even with allies like Europe and the EU, anyone trying to sell Durham wheat can, well understand and better articulate than can I the issues we have on that front. We're facing trade negotiations with India and what will be a generation struggle, I think, to be able to engage India in a more predictable and beneficial manner for both countries. So the opportunities exist in the baseline. Where we need to apply our energy is working on not market access so much as quality of access. We need predictability. We need certainty. These are things I think everyone in the room knows. The question is, how do we get there? And that is where I think I don't know yet. We haven't done enough work yet to determine if there's hope or if there's more reason to worry. So a group in the ag policy community are looking at a complete revision of Canadian ag trade policy, throwing everything out and starting with a clean slate. We're working with Tyler McCann. I don't know if Tyler's there from CAPI, but a group of us are starting to talk about developing a new plan A for Canadian global ag trade policy in light of the breakdown of rules-based trade, in light of the American abandonment of its role as protector for rules-based trade to from cop to shakedown artist, essentially, from cop to mobster in terms of conducting shakedowns in international trade. There's a tough road ahead, but I think there are many of us who are starting to turn our minds away from what worked in the past and try and figure out what's going to work in the future. So if you have any hope, I think that's one sign. We at least are aware of the problem, the massive scope of change. We're not talking tweaks here. And some of us are starting to focus our minds on out of the box thinking for what we can do for the new world in which we find ourselves.
So in terms of quality of access to markets, not necessarily access to them, but what that access looks like and how much value, I guess, is placed in that access, is that something that a policy organization like us can work on as far as dealing with, say, for example, things like non-tariff trade barriers?
Exactly. That is where we're really going to need the support of the grassroots organizations that I would argue has largely been absent on the full range of issues that you face, from right to repair to improvements in trade infrastructure. There's a lot of work that's being done on these issues. Take trade infrastructure, for example. There's a national coalition of organizations ranging from the Business Council of Canada down to Canadian manufacturers and exporters, and even the provinces, working on a new system for building trade infrastructure that starts with a new way to gather data, to turn data into intelligence, to convene the private sector, shippers and transporters in a model that's being used in Australia, that's being used in the UK, that's being used in Malaysia, to try and bring all forces together to make more efficient and effective what we build. It's the shovel-worthy, not the shovel-ready approach. So there are things that are happening, but the issue is ag's largely been absent from these conversations, even interoperability. The right of people in the audience to choose which implements you want to use, what swathers or headers you want to use, so you don't have to run all red or all green or have the manufacturers tell you you can only use their implements. That work came out of Saskatchewan, the folks down the frontier, but we really didn't have support from the ag community or producers associations in the fight to get the government to look at the issue and the fight to have a private members bill go through Parliament and go through Senate so that you now have enshrined in law the right to choose equipment. So yes, we definitely need more participation from the agricultural community in these issues.
So, and I think the comment around right to repair is really key, because it is an issue that has been going on for a while, and we do finally have this private members bill. Now, because it is so new, it still needs to be, a lot of the devil is in the details, so to say. So there will be some tests coming up to this in the next number of years. I think that the right to repair and the ability of an individual farmer to choose, say, for example, what header they put on what combine is incredibly important. I think one of the things that hasn't been talked about often enough in that space and in that scene, ironically, it's not the one that gets the most attention, which of course is the right to modify. So I don't want the DEF system on my machine, so I'm going to delete that. That is really, I think it's a key piece of the puzzle, but it really is a little bit of an aside, honestly, when you begin to look at the entire picture and you start talking about things like data transparency, because that's the next step on that right to repair scale is, how much data are these machines collecting? Who is doing what with the data, who's aggregating it, who's making money off of it, and are farmers okay with the wholesale, giveaway of all of the farm data that their machines are collecting?
Yeah, no, you're spot on, Jeremy. This is the next great issue. You've had success success has been had with the interoperability issue. All the towns like Frontier, where you've got folks making equipment, the Americans were coming for those jobs before they came for the jobs in the auto sector. And we've managed to forestall them in the short line industry. But yeah, information. You're going to walk into your dealership to renew a lease or to pick up new equipment, and you're going to be sitting across the desk from someone who's got more information about your financials than you do, who has a better model of your economic picture than do you. So the data issue is the next frontier after interoperability and right to repair. The good news is that the interoperability issue is now at the provincial level. The federal changes require changes in provincial legislation. We wrote a piece with a lawyer from Dalhousie back at the Canada West Foundation about what the provinces needed to do. So this is one that's squarely in your court. I mean, folks in the audience, it's squarely in your court to call up your MLAs and ask them what they're doing about the issue, where progress is or where progress isn't. So yeah, this is one that's right in front of you. And if we don't get this right and the work at the federal level is undermined at the provincial level by economic forces that would like to see less choice, well, that's not going to be on Ottawa. That's going to be on the folks in Saskatchewan and folks in the audience.
Yeah, sometimes it's sometimes the challenge that exists is, we're playing checkers and we're unaware that our opponents are playing chess. I'd like to drill down a little more, and I kind of wonder, we talked earlier this morning, and we've been talking about grain contracts and export sales data reporting. Now, we've got a really good example of grain contracts with the Australia model. We've got a really good model of the export sales reporting out of the USDA. Is there a jurisdiction in the world that has really kind of dealt with the potential issues and liabilities that exist around ag data? Has someone got a model that they've come up with in another jurisdiction that we can look to, or is this really kind of the Wild West where we need to sort of invent the solution ourselves?
Wow. So yeah, it's been a few years since I've been on the file and since moved on to things like tariffs from the US. But what I remember from where I left the discussions with the coalition of groups that were working on this So there are international forums on this. The Europeans are doing work. There are advocacy groups and the farm advocacy, farm tech groups in Australia. The Australians, I think, have put together, and again, this is 70%. I'm getting kind of old, more gray hair, memory going. But the Australians are what stick out in the fog of memory as groups that have really been working on this. And that coalition of folks that were behind the interoperability fight still exists. Folks down at Frontier working on the issue with American allies, the Shortline Industry Manufacturing Association, Donna Boyd and her crew. So that coalition still exists. But again, participation from grassroots producers organizations are key. There's several different interest groups involved here. Equipment manufacturers, Deere, Case, Holland, and the like, the shortline industry, but also the end users, producers, farmers. So you really need a balanced view between all three. But it's got to start with folks in the audience. It's got to start at the grassroots. And I think the simplest thing is just asking your MLA, hey, I heard about the interoperability private members bill. It's now in our court here in Saskatchewan. What are you doing down in Regina about this?
Yeah, no, I think that is very important to bring it back to the local level so that we've got some action on the provincial side of things. And it is, it is really interesting because when you talk about interoperability, we very often focus on the large pieces of steel we have in our yard. There's generally very little focus on the interoperability of the data that we are producing on our farms and how one program talks to another and how much ability you have as a farmer to switch platforms halfway through. So if you've been running green for a while or you've been running red and you want to switch, all the data that you've accumulated through that time, is that data able to be transported in a reasonably usable fashion to a new piece of equipment? And I think very often there's challenges and hurdles, and I wonder how much the legislation really talks to the interoperability of the actual data as opposed to just the two pieces of machinery.
Yeah, it's a question you have to ask or ask your MLA to ask. I think, the technical terms, the players involved can seem overwhelming, but really you have the lever, and that's to just start asking questions of your MLA. But when you sign an end user license agreement for software to run on your equipment or to lease the equipment itself, and you sign over data, you're signing over power at the negotiating table with folks from whom you buy inputs. If that data is then on-sold to others who have a financial interest and the capacity to buy the data and to employ it in negotiations with you. The data can also be used to improve the overall ag situation. So you wouldn't want to prevent USASC from getting this data for research onto improving agricultural production and performance. So this has to be done right. And the blanket bans or prohibitions that some think about can also come back to bite you. Having no control can come back to bite you. Having too much control can also come back to bite you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd like to go back a little bit because you had started the conversation talking about export infrastructure, and I'd like to drill down on that a little more. I wonder where you see the role of a lobby organization or a policy organization like APAS, and then where you see the role of, say, government, whether it's federal or provincial, in improving some of our export infrastructure. I think if we're generally going to take advantage of some of the opportunities that exist in the RBC report, we need to recognize the fact that we are an export-oriented country. So where are the shortfalls in the export infrastructure right now, whether it's port, rail lines, and what can be done, and who needs to be doing the work?
So the answer to the shortfalls is yes, yes, and yes. We need increased port capacity. We need increased rail capacity. Air is doing okay in Edmonton and Calgary, but smaller airports, Winnipeg comes to mind. They've made major investments, but we certainly need it across the board. Look, we've all seen the figures. We published them extensively at Canada West about falling global rankings, loss of confidence by our customers. But what's changed is we now have the ability, starting on the prairies, to actually look and understand the entire integrated supply and production chains. So not just how does wheat move or how do forestry products move, but how does everything move through the interconnected rail, road, ports, and even airport systems across the prairies. With that information, you understand how an investment in one asset, a bridge, a bypass, a new rail siding, impacts not just your ability to move grain, but how it impacts everyone in the system. With this more intelligent framework that we just simply haven't had, we can now make better decisions, higher return on investment, less disruption, greater improvements in the efficiency and fluidity of the system. This is a game changer. Hats off to the governments of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba for coming together to work on this. So you now have the ability as producers to participate in a more rational, intelligent, and information-informed, data-informed decision-making process. So I think just being aware of the changes are key within the prairie context, and hopefully eventually the feds pick up on this. So something else for when you see your local member of parliament, ask them what their view is on the work for national trade infrastructure planning. What are their plans to improve trade infrastructure? And if they say anything that sounds like shovel ready, well, we're going to take the projects that have been backlogged and simply fund them. That is the least intelligent way to go about this. We need to invest smartly. We finally have the capacity and the data to do so. We need to push in that direction. But we've heard nothing from the current government, and we've heard nothing from the opposition about plans to drop the more intelligent, shovel-worthy approach to trade infrastructure. One more point on trade infrastructure. It's not just that we're lagging the rest of the world in terms of investments, in terms of quality of infrastructure. We're deteriorating, and others that compete with us are improving. So take Latin America. The Chinese have just invested tens of billions of dollars to create a new port on the coast of Peru, the port of Chancay. This port is estimated to it will raise the GDP of Brazil. So Peru over here, Brazil, the other side, the Atlantic coast, Peru, Pacific coast. This port is estimated to raise the GDP of Brazil by 1%. By opening a path to Asia that's 21 days faster. Yes, 21 days faster for Brazil and Argentina to be able to ship pretty much everything that everyone in this audience ships to Asia. The question is, will China still need us when this port becomes fully operational? The interesting thing about this port, besides its capacity and the Chinese money, is that it was built with automation from the ground up, state-of-the-art automation, future ability to adapt to new opportunities in automation, technological advances. I think we know the state of automation at our ports in Canada. I mean, the only automation we have is the reply of no to more automation at our ports. I think that joke needs a little bit of work. But anyway, you get the idea of the seriousness of the situation, despite my attempt at humor there. So it's not just that we are stagnating, we're falling behind, and drastically behind, against people who are as hungry, if not more hungry, for those growing global middle-class markets in Asia I referenced earlier. And no one in Ottawa seems really that plussed about this.
So probably a fair statement to say that we, might not even be playing checkers while our opponents are playing chess, right? With the expansion of that port, it does beg the question, when you calculate the productive capacity of Argentina and Brazil simply in soy production, you ask a very valuable question. Will China still need canola meal from Canada or canola seed from Canada, right? I'd like to ask one more question, and I'd like to open it up to the floor. We had talked earlier a couple of days ago about...
Sorry, Jeremy, one quick thing on soy to drive home to people that don't have the trade history of the hemisphere. In I think it was the 70s, the Americans cut soy exports to Japan. It was a drought in the US. The Americans wanted to protect the domestic processing industry. The Japanese responded by realizing that depending on the Americans for 90% of their soy may not be a great idea. They went to Brazil, where there's a large expat Japanese population, and they invested to create the modern Brazilian soy industry. Over the decades, Brazil's gone from representing 1, maybe 2% of global production to outproducing the US today. So this wasn't fully appreciated when it first happened, when the Americans cut exports and the Japanese went into Brazil. But this is the stuff. You wake up as you're retiring, or your children, as they begin to take over the farm, suddenly see in front of them. It could have been prevented or mitigated or adapted to earlier on, but this is real. This is not hypothetical. We've got evidence, point after point, of this happening globally. And this is what I see happening in Brazil now, which makes our lack of investment in trade infrastructure, the refusal of the unions to allow automation, our government refusing to push to allow automation at the ports. It makes this all the more alarming, given the history of Brazil and soybeans and Japanese investments.
And I think that's a very salient point. The Japanese woke up and realized that relying on the United States for 90% of their soy capacity was not a good idea. And when we as Canadians look at the amount that our export markets rely on the US, a very salient point that maybe it's time for us to wake up too, right?
Exactly. And it's also, the other change recently is China obviously doesn't trust the US, but there's a question, do they trust us? Do they trust Brazil? Will their suppliers be able to supply them in light of US pressure to align with US tariff policy towards China? There's a lot about which we agree with the US on China, but the Americans have shown a propensity to order other countries to follow their lead, and then midstream suddenly dump that horse and go back to the Chinese market and leave us hanging the bag or holding the bag. This happened with the NAFTA renegotiation. The Americans told us not to talk to China, not to consider engagement with China. The ink on the new NAFTA agreement, CUSMA, wasn't dry before the Americans were in China signing their own trade agreement with China, one that set rules. Forget the purchase agreements. The Phase 1 agreement set rules that favored the Americans over us in the Chinese agricultural market. So we're really stuck nowadays between access to the US and following the US and incurring the wrath of China, the second largest economy in the world, the largest producer and consumer of much of what folks in the audience produce.
Yeah, no, and I think that is a very good point. Would it be fair to say that what we lack in, and not necessarily infrastructure, but in a comprehensive plan, is a national strategy for our export infrastructure? And is that a path that we as policy organizations and lobby groups should be focusing on? Is pushing the provinces to deal with the federal government and to come up with a comprehensive national strategy to improve our export infrastructure?
Exactly, and that's the work that the coalition, including the Canada West Foundation, the Business Council, the Canadian Chamber, and RASH, of other groups have put forward. The provinces have been good, and hats off to Saskatchewan for having joined the other prairie provinces in at least getting this work started on the prairies. But no, we need the larger plan. And when I go to Ottawa and I'm talking to folks in the federal government, and especially when I'm talking to MPs and party leadership, the response I get is, yeah, we understand it's a problem, but we've got 30 other things that are a problem. And with these 30 things, we've got 25 groups yelling and screaming at us every time we go home. Summer barbecue circuit, when I'm raising money, I hear about these issues. But no one is talking to me about trade infrastructure unless you show up at my barbecue because someone forgot to stop you at the front gate. And you're in there bending my ear about this, but they're just not hearing it from the grassroots. And you heard Pierre Poilievre. He doesn't want to hear from pinheads like me telling him what needs to be done. He doesn't want to hear from the Business Council and their lobbyists telling him what needs to be done. If he doesn't hear it from the grassroots when he's door knocking, it's not going to be an issue. So if the other sector, the unions at the ports are yelling and screaming at MPs, but the agricultural community is, well, you can imagine what the impression will continue to be in Ottawa about the importance of the issue.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for attending. I'm going to open up the floor to questions. Is there anyone that has a question for Carlo? Remember, please introduce yourself and where you're from, and then go ahead and ask your question.
Wayne Bacon. The question I have for you is...
Oh, sorry, Wayne, where are you from?
I'm from Kinistino, basically not too far from Saskatoon, but you likely never heard of that place. But the question I have for you is the Port of Churchill. What's your opinion about that? Because we spent a lot of dollars getting the rail. The rail is not going to be a problem. The government is throwing in over $100 million into the rail, and I think it's like as best as it's ever been. But they're investing about $26 million into the port. But right now, you got no brokers up there that want to use that port, and I'm not sure how you go about getting brokers up there, because the big five likely are more interested in using their ports as to move up to Churchill. So I just wonder what your opinion is on that. If that would be a good place for us to lobby to try to move a lot of agricultural products out of there.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. A lot of work's being done on Churchill, and there's a proposal for a competing port a little bit south from there. But you're right, the rail issue, I have not confirmed, but I've been told that they've got a new type of rail system with the pilings that can adapt to permafrost. So it does look promising. The port is still not ice-free year-round, so that's going to be an issue. But to your particular point about getting grain folks up there, the government tried subsidizing grain shipments out through the port, and they weren't able to attract folks up. You're right, the big five are a problem. I don't see that we're going back to the era of state-owned grain companies or state-owned trading entities, though everyone else on the planet seems to be moving in that direction. But that's a different discussion. So Churchill is still potential. I think we're getting to the point where we're going to have no choice but to get more serious about it. The First Nations ownership certainly does help in terms of social license and being able to build. So bottom line, I think the parts are there, but I still don't see us ready to move this forward. I don't know if it can be. So there may still be technical issues. I'm not entirely convinced of the story about the rail being sorted out. You need massive investments in infrastructure at the port. It ain't Rupert in terms of weather. So you're going to have much higher costs. I don't know. I keep going back and forth on Churchill, but I do see movement in the direction of taking it more seriously. Sorry.
I don't think so.
Oh, there we go. Yep.
Okay, is it on? Vicky Dutton, Dutton Farms. We exported for many years, and I can honestly tell you the way the wheat board, that too, but the way the railroads are operating now is not much different than what we fought. I wrote an article, 56% is not a passing grade. The recent report on the railways is still not a passing grade. I can tell you, I don't think infrastructure would help us at all, because we have no commitment from this nation to actually be a logistical country that ships. We can be shut down by any union at any time, and that wouldn't matter how much infrastructure. So I am actually very enthused by seeing other industries now being forced to look at exporting outside of USA and Canada for their markets, because I'm hoping there's people in Ontario and Quebec will face the same problems we had. I went with the last minister to Morocco, and they told him, what can we do to improve our markets here? And they said, ship the durum. It's still a problem, and it's even a bigger problem when you want to ship specialty products. I was honored to receive the Pulse Promoter Award, and so I had a long time to consider what had changed in the 50 years I'd been in ag. And actually, unfortunately, very little. We approach problems ineffectively. The fact we're talking about the sales reporting today, and we've talked about it since the wheat board went, tells us that we're ineffective in the way we change policy. And that has something to do with how we influence policy, not how we lobby, how we influence. So my belief is you can have the best combine, you can have the best equipment, and we probably all know people who do, and they still don't get their work done in time. The thing about it is, it's about a commitment from a nation. And the only thing we can do as farmers is get that commitment. And that's our problem today. But I thank you for all of your points. Infrastructure always helps, but we do not have a commitment from this nation to ship product. Thank you.
No, you're absolutely right, and it's across the board. Again, being in Alberta, yeah, you'll get an earful from your neighbors about these issues. Even with the countries begging us, literally, for their national security, we've been able to afford to say no in this country. Large parts of the country, the population centers have been able to afford to say no. We placed other things above us. We know this story. I would say there are a couple things that are changing that should give us hope, or at least, if not hope, at least the encouragement to fight and to fight harder. One is the existential crisis of our generation with the US. I think that large silent majority in the country that didn't want to have their kids yelling at them that they didn't care about the environment, or that they were going to destroy the planet. And so while those issues are real, while climate change is real, the overreaction to not building anything, not producing anything, not cutting down one tree has been arguably a bit much. I think that's changed. I think the crisis with the US, if you look at the public opinion polling, folks who don't produce goods for a living, don't ship or transport goods for a living, have suddenly had it driven home to them how important this is. Diversification from the US, moving goods. That's a window of opportunity. The second is the work on trade infrastructure planning. We did not have the ability to make intelligent decisions about rail because we did not have the intelligence about the entire system, the integrated supply and production networks, forest products, manufacturing, incoming containers. We didn't have the complete picture. We now have no more excuses. There are no excuses. That excuse has been taken off the table. We have the data. We have the ability to turn that data into information. We have proposals for systems that need to be debated by political parties, federal, provincial, et cetera. But at least we have a focused question and a focused plan upon which they can debate. So that's a major change in this country. So The opportunity's there, I think, to take another whack at this. I don't know, I wouldn't give you odds on the probability of success. It's certainly not 100%, but it's certainly a lot more than 10 or 20%. These are major, major changes I never thought I'd see in my lifetime.
Okay, final question.
Yeah, it's Toby, Chair of SAS Park. So anyway, a good presentation, and you talked about the global opportunity and then the quality of the trade access. So I just wanted some more insight on this and maybe even an answer. One of the things that has been placed in front of us to all these groups in here from our government is climate policies that we have to agree and follow. And now with a trade war in our face, it seems to have taken a backseat. Like, would that be something we can use as a selling point? Or it seems to me as soon as you go out into an international market, it doesn't mean anything.
Well, first, Toby, thanks for the support for Canada West Foundation over the years. Pork producers, Alberta wheat, you guys have been there for several years, so thank you for that. In answer to your question, it depends on the market, and you know this better than I. You're selling to the Japanese market, you're not using the same tactics that you would use with the Americans or selling to the Mexicans even. So I think there still are markets, the higher end markets, the environmental issues do matter. I mean, there's consistent data from polling, there's consistent data from industry, there's consistent data from sellers, supermarkets and others in advanced economies that this is important. So it depends on your market. The Americans are getting ready to gut environmental regulations. They're getting ready to gut oversight. Is that a threat to us or is it an opportunity? The Americans are going to cut subsidies to farmers. Is that an opportunity or is that a threat to us? I don't have an easy answer for you because there are no easy answers. There are no simple answers. And anyone that does give you an easy or simple answer either doesn't know or is lying to you. These are incredibly complex questions, but you need the capacity to be able to debate these, to figure these out, and to take your own informed position. At the end of the day, the government is going to come to look to you for your opinion. So being able to figure out those issues is a place where APAS, were it to increase its capacity for analysis, for collecting data, would, I think, be in a better position. You can't rely on the provincial government to do this. I know Rick Burton, he's a great deputy minister, one of my favorite folks in the government, but they simply don't have the capacity to do this on their own. There just aren't enough people in government. The way the world's changed, I mean, you've seen the changes in the US. You've seen the changes globally, the breakdown in global rules-based trade. The Americans are now trying to destroy the World Trade Organization, not save it, not reform it. China has an economic model that's incredibly popular, that's completely different. You don't have the easy world you had in your past. And I take Peggy's point from Dutton Farms about how difficult it's been. But that's looking in the rearview mirror. Looking at what's coming, I think is going to be harder. And it's going to be incumbent on all of us to step up our investments in the ability to survive in this new world without rules-based trade, where the Americans aren't the cop on the street corner. They're the mobster trying to shake people down. So no easy answers, no simple solutions. I do see hard work, but I do see opportunities, the emerging consensus in the country on the importance of moving goods, our ability to finally get a handle on our trade infrastructure system, the fact that some of us are working on a new Plan A for Canadian trade policy. We haven't given up the fight yet, but it's going to be harder. It's going to require more effort, and it's going to require more resources. And the outlook isn't guaranteed. But look, you can either give up or you can stand up and fight. And that's a question, I think, that we're facing as a nation, not just in the ag community.
All right, thank you very much, Carlo. We really appreciate your time.
Sorry I'm not there. Maybe one of these days I'll finally make it to the Saskatoon Inn.
We'll save a space for you.
Thank you, Carlo. Thank you, Jeremy. Our next speaker is Stu Rasmussen on trade wars and farm costs, how U.S. tariffs impact ag retailers. Stu is the Chief Sales Officer at Blair's Crop Solutions and the board chair at the Canadian Association of Agri-Retailers. He grew up on a family farm near Colonsay. He has 25 years of experience on the crop protection side of the ag industry, split between two ag chemical manufacturers. 2025 marks Stu's 14th year working in ag retail. He also helps his son with their family-owned outfitting business in northern Saskatchewan and is the vice chair of the Saskatchewan Commission of Professional Outfitters. Please join me in welcoming Stu.